Woman. Woman of 1950. How does she compare with the woman of 100 years ago? The creature that John Stuart Mill found in a state of subjection. Can she develop her individual talents? Can she help to create the kind of society she wants? Or does she still look upon marriage as the sole purpose of her existence? What does it mean in 20th century Britain to be a woman?
There are 25.5 million of us. 25.5 million women. And if anyone dares to resurrect that old cliche, women's place is in the home, let them contemplate the sight of millions of women out of the home, earning their own living. There are 7.25 million women in jobs, all kinds of jobs. And almost a third of these women are married. Without them, industry would be paralyzed. So if any of those sentimental sort of fellows are around, shaking their heads at this state of affairs, we reply in this day and age, women work while men weep. Not that they've ever wept much over this, or this, or for that matter, this. And there are 1.25 million more women than men. From the point of view of the community, perhaps rather lucky. Yes, very lucky.
But it seems that young girls with their life before them can do what they like. She can earn her own living. Who knows? If she's got the ability, she may rise to cabinet rank. She can have marriage and a career at the same time. Or she can just be married. What more do women want?
Plenty. This is Miss Spender, editor of the Catholic Citizen.
Why can't we have equal opportunities for training for the professions and for technical work of all kinds?
Miss Allison, president of the National Union of Women's Teachers.
And in addition to wanting women to have equal chances with men for training and for technical work, we want women to have equal opportunities with men to fill the posts for which they're suitable.
Mrs. Hemming, from the National Women's Citizens Association.
We want more women in Parliament, in local government, and on all government commissions and committees.
Mrs. Eringay, president of the National Council of Women.
We want married women's incomes assessed and taxed as separate incomes.
And here is...
Wait. Isn't she more representative of the average woman?
Our job is to get married and have children. I don't believe in all this equality nonsense. It's no use pretending that a woman likes working under a woman. She doesn't. Besides, who would employ the average woman instead of a man?
But little by little, the Times gives the lie to these stock objections. Every year, more and more women are at the helm. Ninette de Valois is responsible for the Sadler's Wells Ballet. Dr. Sharp is divisional medical officer for the LCC. Dame Carolyn Hazlitt is director of the Electrical Association for Women. Lady Rhonda is editor of Time and Tide. And Dame Anne Locklin was chairman of the TUC, elected by men and women, and is secretary of a large mixed union. But prejudice dies hard. Sometimes it even finds quite lucid expression.
I've been brought into this as a devil's advocate. That is, I've been brought in to say that I think this vast trek of pioneering women out of the homes and into the factories and the offices is on the whole a mistake. I don't know what we're going to talk in terms of. I'll talk in terms of happiness. And I'll say that I think the general level of people's happiness is lower than it was before women left their homes. Think of the work they do. Are they composing the great symphonies, painting the great pictures, making the great discoveries, ruling the great countries? Of course they're not. They never did. They're acting as drudges for the men.
But what are the facts, Professor Joad? Women painters like Berta Morisot and Frances Hodgkins have international reputations. It depends what you mean by making the great discoveries. But do you remember how the world went mad about Amy Johnson? As for music, This is Elizabeth Lutyens, whose viola concerto is being played at the proms. She is one of many women composers. But despite their progress, women still have to contend with a 19th century outlook. In politics, they sometimes unite with their opponents to fight for their own sex in the Edwardian hangover. Give women the vote, said the government of the day. Impossible. Besides, only a minority of women want it. But after the heavy polls of the last election, who dared to suggest that only a minority of women use it?
But do women vote for women?
That story is best told by Mrs. Burke.
I don't believe that today there is prejudice in the minds of voters against women candidates, not even women voters. But is this true of the local political parties which actually select the candidates? Here I think there is still prejudice in the minds of some of the selectors. And strangely enough, women are often as prejudiced as men. Unfortunately, this prejudice is probably strongest where the candidate has a good chance of winning and weakest where there is little hope of success. The prejudice is due, I think, to a quite mistaken view of the effect women candidates have on the electorate. When this prejudice goes, I am confident we shall have many more women MPs.
It is strange that women aren't allowed to drive London taxis or buses, when in times of emergency they're expected to do this. Here is a municipal block of flats that is being built to the design of the architect Jane Drew. But when we're in search of a new home, how often does a woman help us to find one? If there is such a thing as a purely feminine occupation, you'd think this was it. Very few women are helping to run our nationalized industries, in particular the coal industry. And yet, where women have entered what was once a masculine domain, society has been much enriched. They've brought wit, and some of them greater integrity to journalism. There was a time when women didn't perform in the theater, and for years it was considered most unladylike. How unnatural and how dull that would seem today. Since women entered Parliament, legislation has been directed more and more for the welfare of women and children. The women's vote profoundly influences political policy. It would be difficult to imagine life without our shorthand typists, but the first of her species had to have the courage of a lion. And the old prejudice isn't dead yet. For a woman in a job in 20th century Britain is still made to feel inferior. She's not paid the rate for the job. She's cheap labor. The postwoman gets almost £1 a week less than the postman. In industry, the same thing is happening. Sometimes she gets proper piece rates, but her basic rate is far lower than his. This has gone on for some time. But what of the brand new jobs? Because she's a woman, she gets less than he does. That charming assistant who sells shoes gets less than the man who sells shoes. Schoolmasters are finding it increasingly difficult to make ends meet. But what about the school mistress? She gets less than her opposite number.
But he may have a family to support, 2 or 3 children. Is it suggested he shouldn't get more than a spinster?
In that case, he should also get more than a bachelor. But no more than 40% of working men have to support a family of children. That's less than half. And because the number of old people over young is increasing, more and more working women have dependents. The schoolmistress, like many working women, is doing 2 jobs. Whereas when people talk of a married man's responsibilities, aren't they sometimes inclined to forget he's getting value and service? Does anyone dare to suggest his wife is a dead weight? But people, unhappily, are not paid according to their needs. This is an industrial consultant, Mr. Ian Mercado.
Well, I've spent most of my working life organising the work of people in factories and calculating and controlling how much that work costs. And when you do that, you know that the only way in which you can operate industry efficiently and sensibly and keep costs and hence prices steady, which is what we all want to do, is to pay not the person doing the job, but pay the job. The state looks after the extra needs which come out of extra responsibilities of wife and children to a certain extent. We do it through family allowances, through income tax rebates, through all sorts of other social provisions, free education and the like, to pay a part of the cost that Tom has incurred in bringing a family up. So far as industry is concerned, and this applies of course to the professions, the same job done in the same way, with the same skill, with the same level of effort, must always cost and hence must always be paid for at the same rate of pay.
But does unequal pay benefit men? In the old days, glass was mostly hand-blown. Glass making was a man's world. Today, it's manufactured, and the glass industry is largely a woman's world. For women are cheap labor. If men are employed in this factory, they must be paid about £1 a week more. So men are not employed if it can be avoided. This was once a heavy industry, a man's occupation. The women are rapidly taking over. As industries are modernized, physical strength is no longer required, and women are cheap. In the new industries, plastics, light metal, radio, employers hardly consider taking on men at all. That is why in other industries, men are fighting to keep women out altogether.
They're right. They must guard against unemployment.
Did you mention unemployment? This was one of the old depressed areas. The government has directed factories to this area to help balance industry and provide work for miners with silicosis. Many of these miners are still unemployed. Women have taken the work, for women are cheap labor. It's true that many are the wives and daughters of miners and their money helps, but it's pretty demoralizing for the men. When unemployment was at its peak in Britain, the number of women employed was steadily rising. New techniques make work lighter, easier, cleaner. The government has started a huge program of investment in our basic industries. Where is it leading us? Where does the process of undercutting inevitably lead? But where women are paid the rate for the job, in the BBC, the film industry, the theatre, and in Parliament, the men are none the worse.
But in these days of wage restraints, many people feel that the lower paid workers should be the first to receive concessions, the railway workers in particular.
But what about the women railway workers? And many of them have dependents of their own. Besides, the old type of steam engine is gradually giving way to electrification. The public are clamoring for cheaper fares. Is his job safe as long as women are legally permitted to undercut the men? No wonder he fights to keep her out.
But all political parties agree with the principle of equal pay. It's simply that now isn't the time.
Now never is the time. Women were fighting for the rate for the job even before they were going to prison for the vote. That's one of the reasons why they fought for the vote, why they paved the way for women to go to Parliament. Have some of those women in there who are getting the rate for the job forgotten the cause of women?
But the Chancellor of the Exchequer has told them that it will lead to inflation.
We, who represent all political parties and millions of women, civil servants, engineers, school teachers, bank clerks, professional women, business women, and industrial workers, ask this simple question. Would anyone of integrity try to get out of their financial difficulties by paying him less than the rate for the job because he's a Catholic? Or him because he's a refugee? Or him because of the color of his skin? Or him because he's got ginger hair?
What a way to solve our financial problems. But we insult women in this way. Britain has signed the United Nations Charter, the Declaration of Human Rights.
Everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Was this signed in good faith, or is it a gesture of hypocrisy?
Systematic and deliberate denials of basic human rights lie at the root of most of our troubles and threaten the work of the United Nations.
Isn't it time that we in Britain made it a proud thing to be a woman?